Hey, I'm Clifford Lewis, retired U.S. Forest Service range scientist. We started, Forest Service started doing some range improvement practices back in the late 40s in South Georgia, and eventually grew into doing a lot of pine pasture research. Then after I transferred to Gainesville, Florida in 1980, we started doing the wide row spacing, double row configuration research, primarily on Withlacoochee State Forest and Avon Park Bombing Range on native rangeland. And we had already done a lot of pine pasture research in South Georgia, so we kind of combined the two philosophies together to come up with this double row configuration in pastures. And because the double row configuration allows it to have sunlight penetration throughout the pine rotation, and therefore you can produce a good crop of forage all along, and have an annual crop through your cattle sales while you're growing off your timber crop. So the combination of the two is an attempt to make land use more profitable, particularly if you want to remain in the forestry production area and then branch off into the livestock, or vice versa, if you want to diversify your livestock operations and get into some forestry with long-term investment that can prove very profitable. George Owens and Pat came to one of our Extension Service seminars over in Lake City back in about 1985, I think, and in which we discussed this concept and philosophy. And George is a very enterprising young man, and so they came home and said, we think that we can make that thing work on some land we just bought. This is in Wiregrass pasture, and so they were the first innovators of this practice here in Florida, and I guess first one in the nation to go with the double row configuration. And George has managed it very well, made it very profitable, and has gained a lot of influence and popularity across the South and everything in his promotion of this practice.
The farm I live on is a Century Pioneer farm. I'm the fourth generation Owens that farmed this operation. We have been in business here over 100 years. I hope it continues. This is planted in 1984. We thinned this timber starting at 10 years old and have thinned it every 5 years since then. This is a stand of slash pine on 4x8x40 spacings, and it's in the final stage. We will only cut this one more time. Everything that's here should be a pole or saw timber or veneer block. So when this timber is cut, we'll wait until the market gets stout or hot, and when the market gets available where we feel like we get the most money for it, we'll cut this timber the last time and probably replant between the rows. As you can see, this timber is marked. I use a consultant forester, does all of my timber marking and marketing. We take the timber as we get ready to thin. He puts a package together where we sell mature trees as well as younger trees in a lump sum. We will bid the timber off to seal bids, give the contractor 1 year to cut the timber. We require a 75% upfront pay for the cruise value of the timber. The only way to sell timber, in my mind, is to sell it through a consultant, because the fee he charges, he will sell more timber. You'll get more money out of the timber than his fee cost you. The basis for us going into the Silvopasture system was on some research done by a gentleman named Cliff Lewis, who was a research forester for USDA back in the 60s in Georgia. His papers stated that the configuration of 4x8x40, like we've got it planted here, will produce as much timber volume as a solid set. We chose to plant these trees on an east and west configuration so that we could maximize the sunlight on the floor of the forest and the forage. In order for grass to grow, you need ample sunlight and moisture. Planting these east and west, you get the benefit of the daytime sunlight across the longer distance between the rows. Also, this is an excellent configuration for wildlife. We have a constant problem here with deer tearing down the electric fence that we use to divide these grazing cells, because they're grazing in here with the cattle and running back and forth during the breeding season. Also, we've reintroduced turkeys to this area, and they use this area to nest and scratch and feed and dust in. So it's been a real win-win situation for us as far as the wildlife and the cattle on this configuration.
The advantage we see here in the early years is that you can hay between the double rows for about 2 to 3 years until pine straw becomes an issue, and after that time the trees are large enough where you can do some grazing, especially with light calves, and then after another year with grown cows, and then the following year, after about year 5, you don't have to worry about bulls breaking the tops out of the trees. So the idea is so those light calves are stockers at year 3 without having any detriment to the trees, and then of course 4 and 5 years for the mature cows, and then the bulls at 5. So you can utilize that. One of the advantages too is that you have an issue with grazing under these trees, and clover can be established. It does extremely well. It comes out early in the fall and stays late in the spring when it has shade that has a ability to keep the soil cool and the temperature in a condition where it doesn't burn out. In this part of the country, crimson clover plays out around the 1st of April, and here we'll see it last probably 2 to 3 weeks longer under these trees than we would under an open pasture setting. Also, we'll see a situation where it comes out about 2 weeks earlier in the fall. The shade of the trees also help with moisture content, because it keeps the soil cooler and we don't have as much loss of moisture in the surface, so that helps the clover do well as also. And with the benefit of grazing here, we see cattle graze throughout the day all summer long. In the extreme heat of July and August and the hot humidity that we have here in this part of the country, we see that cattle are a lot more comfortable in this silvopasture setting. You watch in an open pasture setting and you'll see that most of the cattle in the middle of the day are gathered up under a big oak tree in the border of the field, or in wherever there are shade, and all the droppings and manure and urine are left under those big trees instead of distributed throughout the pasture. But when you have silvopasture like this, and there's adequate shade, the cattle are scattered all over the area, and you see those droppings distributed throughout the stand, so your nutrients are more evenly dispersed in your field. You get more benefit from the trees and the forage from the urine and feces that are spread throughout the acreage. And that's pretty indicative. If you can look in the wintertime or whenever you see a lot of droppings and they're evenly dispersed, then you can tell those cattle were out grazing throughout that stand instead of collected under the edge of a big tree. You'll also see them in the middle of the day. A lot of times cattle graze early in the morning, late in the evening, but under this silvopasture setting they'll graze throughout the day. So you're getting higher intake, and if you can get the intake up, then certainly you're going to get a better performance and growth out of your calves. So it does have some benefit from there as well. Crimson clover is one of the more popular clovers that are used here in Florida, especially on our sandier soils or well-drained sites. It has a tremendous advantage in that it'll produce about 90 pounds of N per year, And of course, with the price of ammonium nitrate being $550 a ton right now, if you can salvage that kind of benefit, then certainly that's an economical value to most any producer. One of the things that seems to be a good opportunity for most people is that if they'll have clover in their Bahia grass and take care of it with their fertilization, which doesn't require nitrogen, just phosphorus and potash and a few minor elements, then the clover will take care of the Bahia grass. It's going to produce the nitrogen, and what residual potash and phosphorus there should be adequate to keep your Bahia in good production, and you should be able to get some good utilization in pasture from the benefit of the clover, as well as the fertilization and care of the clover as a residual to the Bahia. One of the things that helps as far as success in production of clover is to make sure your pH is in the 6 to 6.5 range. Most of these clovers like a more neutral type pH that's buffered well, and of course calcium and magnesium are important nutrients. So liming your fields appropriately after a good soil test will certainly enhance your success in producing clover. If you go to the trouble and expense to put the seed out, you certainly want it to be successful. Clover is not only high in protein, but it is a forage that is high in estrogen that helps get our cattle cycling in the spring. Naturally, cattle that need to be on a positive energy balance and gaining weight to come into heat, but you get an added benefit from the estrogen of the clover, getting the cattle kicked off to cycling in the spring, and so that allows you to get those cattle bred before the temperature gets hot and you have other issues there as heat stress that interferes with your breeding. So it definitely can get you in a position to get the cattle bred early, and therefore you're going to have larger calves the following year at weaning. You're also going to have those cattle have early calves because they're going to breed early in the breeding season.
This is an inline water trough. All of our farms are divided into grazing cells. In these grazing cells, they normally from 5 to 7 acres. We run the cattle on that from 5 to 7 days and graze the material. We use an inline water trough where the water will be available to the cattle on either side of the electric wire. We divide these grazing cells by single strand, and that gives the cattle control, although the calves can creep graze across the cell if they so choose. Trailer feeders to keep it up off the ground. We store it in barns on pallets, and because hay is one of the highest priced commodities we feed. We stockpile Bahia grass in the fall to carry the cattle on over into December without having to feed any hay. All the minerals we feed, which we feed year round, whether it be a protein mineral or whether it be a regular cattle mineral, we feed in these covered feeders. We feel like with the cost of mineral, there's no way you can feed it in an open feeder without losing a percentage of it, so we buy these covered feeders, move them from one site to the other when we're on controlled grazing on these skids. We normally breed 120 days a year. We start along in the middle of March and breed through the first week of July, so our calves are born uniformly in about a 100-day period. We'll bring them in, worm them, de-lice them before we turn them out in the spring so they won't be rubbing on the trees. And in the fall, in September and October, we palpate the cattle, all that are not bred are sold, and if they are old or have missing teeth, they're sold. 1971, when I started this operation, I began buying metal panels to make cow pens out of. These panels that you're looking at here are almost 40 years old. and we're still using them. And as a management tool, we feel like the cattle need to be worked at least twice a year. And if you don't have a safe set of pens to work them in, you're just going to get your cattle hurt or you hurt. And we've been real pleased with this investment.